Okay, so welcome to the talk, part of the evening. So the talk is titled Sitting on the Diamond Throne. And I thought that was a euphemism for the toilet. Is it? I don't know. Maybe that's the porcelain throne. Anyway. But the talk's not about the toilet. Okay, so... I just had to get that out of the way because I can't get it out of my mind. Okay, so the current theme is Great Buddhist Teachers, not Great Buddhist Toilets. Right. Okay, so this evening we're going to medieval Japan, and we're going to be meeting the Great Zen Master Dogen, or Dogen. I think I'm not sure of the pronunciation, but Dogen will be what I'll use. So the essence of Zen is that you're already enlightened. You just have to realize the true nature of your own Buddha mind. So that's what we're going to do tonight. So yeah, Zen Buddhism, it's a very different approach to what we're used to in the modern West, our approach that we're used to. So if you were in a Zen monastery right now, what might you be doing? So you might do away with the traditional Buddhist practices that we're used to, and you might just meditate all day and all night on an unanswerable puzzle called a koan. So you might be doing koan practice. Or you might receive direct mind-to-mind transmission from your uncompromising Zen master. And you might be given a completely punishing and relentless regime to bring about like a sudden awakening, a shattering awakening. So that's what you might be doing in a Zen monastery. And I'm glad I'm in Sheffield, where we've got peppermint tea and nice friendly teachers. Yeah, so in our tree Ratna system, we do have the tree. We've not got the tree up this evening, but we've been having the tree of refuge and respect, which is our refuge tree. And we've got all these teachers of the distant past on that tree. So lots of teachers from really different traditions, different times, different cultures, from all different Buddhist schools and sects. So we can see ourselves as practicing within that context of the whole Buddhist tradition, because our founder, Bhante Sangharakshita, he's taken inspiration and teachings from many of these great Buddhist schools, and he's kind of translated that for us of what we would find useful today in the modern West. So we do have those influences. So in this series, we're meeting quite a few of these teachers. And actually, our founder, Sangharakshita, he held these teachers in great reverence and respect. And he expressed great gratitude to those traditions that we've had passed down to us. So that's what we're looking at. So tonight we're looking at Zen and Dogen, and we're going to medieval Japan to find our Buddha nature. That's what we're doing tonight. Okay, so Zen originated in China, where it was called Chan. So Chan is from the Indian word dhyana or jhana. So then Chan came from China to Japan, and the Japanese word is Zen. So actually the word Zen comes from the Indian word jhana, and jhana means meditation. So Zen, Zen's primary focus is meditation. So there's also a great emphasis in Zen on the relationship between the master and the student. So in the Zen tradition, the realization is handed on from master to student by direct transmission, a direct mind-to-mind transmission from master to student down through the lineage. So in some schools, the Zen master might be harsh and uncompromising, really trying to break the ego of the student. So it doesn't conform to our usual conventions or sensitivities often. So I'll just tell you a story from China from the 6th century of a semi-legendary figure, the great Zen master, Bodhidharma. So this is a story of a student, Huiko, And Huiko desperately wanted to study with Bodhidharma. He was desperate for the teachings. He was desperate for liberation and freedom. So Huiko came to the master's monastery, and he was left standing outside alone in the snow, freezing cold for days and nights. And the master came out to him and he said, "You're not ready. You're not ready for the teachings." And in desperation, Huiko hacked off his own arm and presented it to the master. And he begged him, "I entreat you to give my mind peace." He did this. He did this. Did that. You're right. And he begged him, "I entreat you to give my mind peace." And the master said, "That's not enough. That's not enough. Bring me your mind. Bring me your mind." So Huiko said, "I've searched for my mind, and my mind is finally unattainable." At which the master said, "Then I have set your mind to rest." And Huiko became fully realized on the spot. So that's just kind of a flavor of the Zen master and the kind of like how that can be. Okay, so in modern day Japan, there are two main schools of Zen. So there's Rinzai and Soto. And Dogen, our teacher for tonight, is the founder of the Soto sect. So both schools, both Rinzai and Soto, have got their main emphasis on meditation. Meditation's called Zazen in Japanese, Zazen. So the Rinzai school focuses on koans. The student focuses their mind on this completely unanswerable, insoluble problem, a koan, and just focuses on it with great intensity, turning it over day and night, meditating on it until realization just happens on another level. So the student is given a koan in this tradition, and then they're interviewed by their teacher, by their master, who tests them really harshly, maybe really strictly disciplined. And they might even like ridicule the student and say, "No, you're really stupid, you're not ready," and just dismiss them, send them away to try harder, to try again. And the student has to work through all the koans, so the sets of hundreds of koans that the student just has to work through to become realized and fully awakened. So that's that tradition. So some famous koans might be, what is the sound of one hand clapping? So the student would just be meditating on that over and over. And another famous koan is mu, not the cow, moo, M-U, mu. And it's the Japanese word for no thing, or not, or no. So the student just turns that over in their mind over and over, no, not, no thing, day and night in everything they do. There's a really interesting book that I've just read, and it's called Pure Heart, Enlightened Mind, and it's a modern day account from the 80s of a woman called Maura O'Halloran. So she's a young woman from Ireland, and she went to study Zen in a Japanese monastery in the 80s. And the book is, it's compiled from her letters and diaries. And you really get a sense of this intensity, and it's quite a modern day book. She was working through the koans, and she was meditating all night. She was just sleeping for a couple of hours in a seated position, working all day, up to 12 hours, and begging outdoors in freezing temperature, barefoot, really extreme practices as a way of breaking through. It's a really beautiful and tragic story. I would recommend reading it. It's lovely to read. She was considered to have become fully awakened by her teacher, and she was sent back to Ireland to found a Zen centre in Ireland. And tragically, she was killed in a road accident on the way back. She's considered now as a kind of saint in Japan, a Zen saint in Japan. So it's an interesting book to read because it gives you a flavour of what Zen is actually really like and what the practices that she was doing. Yeah, so back to Dogen. Dogen founded the Soto school, which has a different emphasis, not on koans, It's an emphasis with a very particular approach to meditation practice. It's sometimes called the Silent Illumination School. And what he taught was that we already have Buddha mind, and we don't need to do anything except realize it. So it's quite a tricky point to grasp, really. So before I go into a bit more detail about Dogen's teachings, I just want to tell the story of how Zen first started, where it came from, because it's really lovely. The lineage goes right back to the historical Buddha. So there's a lineage of direct transmission from master to student directly from the Buddha himself. So the story is that the Buddha was seated amongst a great gathering of disciples, bodhisattvas, arahants, monks and nuns, lay followers, and many celestial beings. And they were all silent, and they were all waiting for the Buddha to speak. But instead of speaking on this occasion, the Buddha just silently held up a golden flower. And that was his discourse. He just held up a golden flower. And one of the disciples, the great disciple, Mahakāshyapa, understood the meaning. And Mahakāshyapa awakened. He became realized at that moment, and he smiled. And the Buddha saw this smile, and the Buddha said, "I am the owner of the eye of the wonderful Dharma, which is nirvana, the mystery of reality and non-reality, and the gate to the transcendental truth. I now hand it over to Mahakāshyapa." So that was the very first direct mind-to-mind transmission in Zen. And then after that, it passed down through 28 Indian Zen patriarchs, they're called, down to Bodhidharma, who's the guy at the monastery, who was the 28th. And Bodhidharma took it to China then in the 6th century, so it's come right from the Buddha. Okay, and another interesting little Zen story, we love these little stories. Bodhidharma did what they call wall gazing. It said he did wall gazing, and that he sat facing a wall for 9 years. And he was so determined that when he became drowsy, when he became sleepy, he ripped off his own eyelids. It can't be true, because if you were just in a cave, you'd just get an infection, wouldn't you? But anyway, no antibiotics back then. He ripped off his own eyelids. And he's depicted in the images with really huge gazing eyes. So this is the legend of Bodhidharma. He was so determined. So like later on when we're doing our meditation after the tea break, we can think about that if we're a bit sleepy. Okay, so back to Dogen. I'll say a little bit about his life story first. So he had a really interesting life. So he was born in 1200 in Japan. And he was born into a high aristocratic family. But his father was killed when he was only 2, when Dogen was 2, and his mother died when Dogen was 7, so he had a very lonely childhood. And he was extremely intellectually gifted. So it's said that he was reading deep philosophical texts by age 12 and really could understand them. And he wanted to become a monk. He'd seen really deeply into impermanence as a child, and he wanted answers, and he wanted to become a monk. But his family didn't want that. He was really bright, and the family had visions of him becoming a political leader. So when he was age 12, he didn't want to do that. So when he was age 12, he ran away on foot in the middle of the night to a monastery. And by age 13, he'd taken the precepts and become a monk. So he did that by age 13. And he was really on a real burning spiritual quest. He was really driven. It really drove him on. And he studied with lots of different teachers. He just really went seeking different teachers. And eventually, he found a teacher who had just come back from China from studying Zen in China. At this time, there was no Zen in Japan, where Dogen was. So he found this teacher and he really questioned this teacher. He questioned this teacher about his spiritual quest. And the teacher said, "I don't know whether Buddhas exist, but I know that an ox and a cat exist." Now, I don't know what that means. It sounds very Zen. But Dogen really apparently was very, very pleased with this answer. And he completely committed himself to this teacher and he studied intensively with this teacher for 6 years. So he liked the answer. But the teacher died and then he searched for and he found a new teacher. And what this new teacher admitted, he said that he didn't know whether he himself had fully realized Buddha mind. So Dogen said, "Right, well, that's it then. We're off to China, me and you, to find out for ourselves." So he just took this approach. So just like that, he was so driven, he undertook a really dangerous journey from medieval Japan to China. And apparently there was pirates and it was really dangerous. And he was only 23 years old when he did this. He just went and did it. When he was in China, the teacher that had gone with him died. And he just continued searching. He carried his teacher's ashes with him, actually. He was very loyal, and he did take his teacher's ashes back to Japan with him later. And he went searching again for a teacher, but what he found, he was really disappointed and disillusioned with the formal practices that he was finding in the monasteries. But eventually, he encountered a great Zen master in a mountain monastery. The master was called Rujing. And there was an immediate, intense kind of recognition between them. And a strong master-student relationship developed between them. So he practiced with this teacher very intensively. And today, even now today in Soto Zen monasteries, there's a form of practice called the Dogen 1,000 days of practice. And because this is what he did for 1,000 days, which is like 3 years, isn't it, or more? He worked all day, really hard work all day. He meditated all night, and he just slept a couple of hours at night in a seated position. In the book that I mentioned, that's what Maura was doing. She was doing the Dogen 1,000-day practice. It's really quite astounding. So during this 1,000 days of practice, Dogen had full awakening. He had full realization. So at this point, he's only in his mid-20s, and he returned to Japan as a Zen master aged 27. When he was back in Japan, he just wanted to live a really simple life. He was an extremely humble man, and he didn't want to start a sect or gather a great following or anything like that. He just wanted to practice quietly and simply. He practiced in a small monastery there that he founded, which is still in existence. And when he died, there were only, I think, 20 to 30 people practicing there with him. And he died only aged 53. So it's quite amazing that his influence, he left a text called Shobogenzo. So we can access and study his words, and his influence has been huge, to say that he just had such a small number of people with him at the time when he was alive. I'll read us a few quotes throughout the talk from Dogen. Okay, so Dogen in this really intense period of practice in his mid-20s had this sudden realization. So what was this realization? What did Dogen realize? It's described as dropping away of body and mind, or casting off body and mind. So a quote from Dogen about this. If you practice Zazen, remember that's meditation, if you practice Zazen as a matter of course for many years, you will suddenly see the vital point of enlightenment and know that Zazen is the true gate from which to enter. And another quote by Dogen, to learn the Buddhist way is to learn about oneself. To learn about oneself is to forget oneself. To forget oneself is to perceive oneself as all things. To realize this is to cast off the body and mind of self and others. When you have reached this stage, you will be detached even from enlightenment, but will practice it continually without thinking about it. So the great realization he had, it was, and I think it's quite a hard point to grasp really, what he realized was that the true nature of Zazen, the true nature of meditation itself, is enlightenment. So Zazen is enlightenment, and enlightenment is Zazen. So practice, meditation practice, is a manifestation of the enlightenment that you already have. So practice isn't about aiming for anything or developing anything, Dogen taught. So another Dogen quote, all things are always the Buddha nature. All things are of the nature of openness. Seeing this perfectly as it is in the present moment, with complete at-oneness with the events around one, in total openness to its wonder and perfection, as in fact absolute reality itself, is both the nature of practice and the nature of enlightenment. So Dogen was saying that right now you are already enlightened, you already are a Buddha, you don't need to do anything to achieve that, and all practice is an expression of the enlightenment you already have. You don't do anything, you just sit. There's nothing to do, there's nowhere to go, you just sit. So this actually is the origin of our just sitting practice. You know, at the end of our meditation, quite often we'll say, oh, just have a minute to just sit. Relax any effort and just sit, don't do anything. So we've got a flavour of this kind of Dogen approach already in our practice right from the beginning, right from the start. Okay, so Dogen's saying that we're all already enlightened. We don't have to do anything. We just do nothing. So I can think of a few pitfalls with this approach. Because actually, Dogen's point is very subtle. It's very subtle and it comes from a really high level of realization. So I think it needs qualifying for us in our context because it can be problematic. I think taking that approach could be problematic. If we just wandered into a Zen monastery now with no experience, no context, and very little instruction and just sit for 9 years staring at a wall or whatever, we would just be sitting with our unskillful habits of mind, wouldn't we? We'd just be sitting in dukkha, and I don't know how that would go after 8 hours looking at a wall for me anyway. So our founder, Bhante Sangharakshita, is very wary of this approach, especially for inexperienced practitioners. So one reason that he gave for this is that there's a potential misunderstanding of Buddha mind or Buddha nature. So we can, if we take this wrong, we can see Buddha nature as our real fixed essential self. And that would undermine the very central Buddhist teaching that there's no fixed central separate self. So we could just take this the wrong way and completely misunderstand the wisdom of it. And also, we might just not practice, we might just not do anything. And I sort of think, well, if we could be enlightened by not practicing, we would be enlightened, wouldn't we, already? So we mustn't understand these teachings, you know, they really need to be taken in context. Because Dogen did teach, actually, that we have to practice very, very hard to unearth our Buddha nature. We have to do things to really realize that. And this approach of just sitting that he was teaching, it came about and he was teaching it within a really strong discipline of very intense practice in the monasteries. A very strong practice of work, meditation, ritual, study and friendship, very full-time practice. So just sitting took place within that context. But we can use it for inspiration, can't we? We can learn from it. So what was he getting at? What is he getting at? So the Zen approach, it's all about simplicity, really. A sort of extraordinary ordinariness. So we're not trying to get somewhere else. We're not trying to get somewhere special, nirvana. It's already here. So after realization, the world is the same. So the world is the same after realization. We just see it differently. So there's something here about seeing through our delusion. So just seeing differently, dropping away this filter of seeing from our usual perspective of a fixed and separate self. So usually we see things from what Zen calls small mind, a small mind perspective, a personal perspective. So we usually see things that, I'm central, there's me in here, I'm the center of the universe, I'm looking out at separate, real, fixed things out there. That's our usual perspective, what Zen calls small mind. And actually, in reality, everything is utterly interfused, inseparable and ungraspable, and this is an artificial way that we see things. So this approach, this Zen approach, it's about letting go of that. It's about surrendering this small mind perspective into reality, surrendering into big mind, opening to reality. And of course, reality already is that way. Reality already is reality. It just is how it is. So we're not trying to change anything. We're not trying to get somewhere else. We just need to awaken to how things really are. So we're just trying to see it as it already really is. So another Dogen quote, students, cast aside your bodies and minds and enter fully into Buddhism. You have climbed to the top of 100-foot pole. Now keep on going. Most people, when they reach the top, are afraid they will lose their footing and fall to their deaths. Thus, they hang on all the more tightly. To advance another step means to discard all thoughts of everything, from your functions as a savior of other beings to the means of your own livelihood. Even if it requires casting away your own life, if you do not do this, and even if you study the way as earnestly as though you were trying to put out flames in your own hair, you will not be able to attain the way. Resolve to cast aside both body and mind. So he was very, very determined about this stuff. So as Dogen's telling us, we need to allow reality to penetrate our small mind perspective. So we need to surrender, he's saying, we need to surrender to reality. And Dogen teaches that the practice of meditation itself is, in fact, it's an act of surrender, it's an act of faith. It's an act of surrendering to reality vastly beyond our small mind. So this is what he's trying to get across to us. So Dogen saw Zazen, meditation, as an act of deep faith, an act that is highly sacred and mythic. So he saw meditation as a sacred, mythic, religious act. So he taught that every meditation seat, every cushion, every stool, every meditation seat is a direct connection to the meditation seat of the Buddha himself, to the Vajrasana, the diamond throne of the Buddha's enlightenment. Every meditation seat is a direct link to that, to the Vajrasana. So in just sitting, you connect with the Buddha's awakened mind. You open yourself up to the influence of the Buddha. You just take your seat. You yourself, you open up to the influence of the Buddha. You yourself, you can't make anything happen, because what Dogen's saying is, you are deluded and there isn't really a you. The Buddha's influence has to do the practice. So in just sitting, we open up to the influence of the Buddha. You take your place on the Vajrasana as a deeply sacred and religious act. So when you meditate, you don't have to do it. In fact, you can't do it. You just take your seat and you surrender to the influence of the enlightened mind of the Buddha. resonating down through time and space and through you out into the world. So we just take our place on the diamond seat and we manifest the enlightened mind. Okay, so how can we use that? How can we use those teachings, maybe we find that inspiring. How can we use that in our daily, everyday practice, here and now, how we are today? So personally, I really love this. I really love this approach. It helps me actually in terms of developing right view. So my background was as a physicist, and my mind is very well trained to see things from the perspective of the small mind. So to see things as material and real and fixed and measurable and unchanging. And of course, that's not how things are. But I can really default to that view. And I think a lot of us can in the modern West. I think that view is kind of taken for granted. It's sort of the water that we swim in. So I think this sacred kind of big mind approach, opening to something beyond myself, it can be really helpful for us. And it's not a philosophy and it's not a belief system. So it's not something that we need to believe or make sense of. It's a direct experience. So Dogen was coming from direct experience. And I do remember one time really getting a flavour of this, really glimpsing this on a walk in the woods. I just kind of meditating, kind of walking, meditating. I just kind of went, oh, actually, it's all the Buddha. There isn't really this separation of time and space, like it's the Buddha here and now. The Buddha's the nature of everything. And I really got a sense of that, and it was really quite perfect and very freeing. And of course, I'm not usually in touch with that, but I think because of that experience, I know it to be true, so it can really feed my Shraddha to take this kind of approach. So I do love this kind of approach, this sort of trying to let go of holding on to things, really relaxing, really allowing in meditation. But I do think it needs to be one approach in a system of practice. So I definitely think that I need a balance, and I think we probably all need a balance of sort of active, structured practices and then some of this kind of receptive just sitting. And that's what Bhante Sangharachita recommends, actually, is that we do mindfulness of breathing, some just sitting, metta bhavana, some just sitting, and that we alternate active and receptive practices. So, so just to come towards the end of the talk, Dogen and Zen it's all about our attitude to meditation. What attitude do we bring to meditation? So maybe just the last bit of the talk we can reflect on what is your attitude to and approach to meditation. Because Dogen's telling us that we need two specific approaches. So we need effort and we need surrender. So we need discipline and we need a sacred attitude. So we need both those things. So maybe reflect on, what is your attitude to meditation? Which of those things really resonates with you, or which would you like to develop more of? So I'm going to try something out. I'm going to say some things to you about these approaches, and just notice what your inner response is. Just notice what it brings up for you. What do you feel? What do you think? And that might help you to know a bit more about what your attitude to meditation is, and maybe what you'd like to cultivate more of. Okay, so firstly, effort and discipline. So I'll say some things about effort and discipline in meditation and see what you think. See what happens to what do you feel. Meditation is absolutely essential to spiritual development. If you want to make any progress, you need to dedicate time and effort to meditation. What does that bring up for you? Do you love that, or do you kind of go, oh, okay. Meditation is absolutely essential to spiritual development. If you want to make any progress, you need to dedicate time and effort to meditation. That's the first approach, discipline. Okay, and then secondly, this kind of sacred approach of faith and surrender. So secondly, I'll say some things about this. Just see what it brings up. Meditation is a sacred religious act. It's not self-help or relaxation or emotional development. It's a sacred religious practice. So what does that do? What do you feel? What do you think about that? Meditation is a sacred religious act. It's not self-help or relaxation or emotional development. It's a sacred religious practice. So maybe one of those approaches really resonates and you feel very in touch with that, and maybe one of them really annoys you. That might tell you that you maybe need to cultivate a little bit more of that one. So it's interesting to just see, isn't it, when we hear those things. Okay, so if we want to cultivate more, for the first one, if we want to cultivate more effort and discipline, some ideas. If you don't have a regular established practice, could you establish one? What would get you on the cushion? So maybe in the tea break, talk to people who do have an established practice and just get some kind of like hints and tips, and how do they do that? What do they do? Could you get up earlier? Could you talk to the people that you live with? And if you do have a regular practice, can you up it? Maybe not in the snow all night outside a monastery, but could you sit for an hour at the weekend? Could you have a morning of practice for yourself each week, something like that? Could you book onto a retreat? And could you spend some time just sitting and see what that's like, and see what that brings up, and see what's happening in your mind? And then the second one, maybe more of the sort of sacred, mythic approach. Some ideas of how you could bring this into your practice. Could you ritually prepare for meditation? So could you clean your space, your meditation area? Could you set up your shrine, offer flowers, incense, make the area really beautiful? Could you bow to your cushion as a sacred seat that connects you to the Buddha? Express gratitude to having met the Dharma and having the opportunity to practice. Maybe chant mantras, bring to mind images or place inspiring images in your meditation area on your shrine. Read poetry, read a Dharma text, maybe memorize a Dharma text. And then take your seat, the sacred Vajrasana, and connect with the Buddha. Maybe like with a real sense of Buddha pride and dignity and faith and confidence. So maybe that's an approach. Okay, thank you.